I'm Barbara Lundblad, and I was here from 1976 to 1979.
And I'm Susan Thomas, and I was here during that same period.
And I'm Barbara Rossing, and I was here during that same period, although I graduated in 81 because I took an internship here. But we all started in 76 together.
Right.
When you were looking at grad school or Divinity School, what made you choose YDS?
I was utterly ignorant. I went here because I knew some person who had gone here.
Oh, well, the person who had gone here was my husband.
Oh.
Who since we were already in New Haven, it made sense to apply here. And so that was simple.
And I came here instead of to a Lutheran seminary. I have an older sister who's a Lutheran pastor who went to Luther Seminary, but I wanted to go to a school that had women on the faculty.
Wow.
So that was definitely a factor for me.
Great.
And one quick thing, make sure when you guys are answering, look at page.
Okay.
That helps with the,
Yes.
okay,
Okay.
good.
So do you want me to say that again?
Yeah, if you could.
And I came here in 1976 because I wanted to go to a school that had women on the faculty. I had an older sister who was a Lutheran seminary student at a school with no women, and it was very important to me to study with women.
What was most unexpected about YDS when you got here?
I didn't have many expectations because I didn't know any faculty. I didn't even know enough to say what Barb said about studying with women faculty. So I think that everything was unexpected in a lot of ways.
I think for me what was unexpected, the big thing was that it felt like a really affirming place for me at that point, that I was really ready to dig into studying, and that was welcomed and affirmed. And so it felt like a real flowering time in my life.
Yeah, unexpectedly positive was the dorm life. Barbara Lundblad and I lived in Taylor House, and at that point, women lived upstairs and men downstairs, but we had such a good time living in the dorm. It was just great.
Yeah.
And that was, and then we, of course, ate all our meals in the refectory. So it was a real strong sense of community, chapel every day. It was great.
About what percentage of your class were women? Or how many women do you think were here on campus then?
Well, we sort of cheated. Just that we were looking at the statistics in the other room, but I had the feeling that there were, about as many women as men. It wasn't quite that way, but it was, we were here with women who had been here when there were very few women, so there had been a big shift from, say, the seniors and to our year. So I don't, maybe it was 40% or something.
Do you think it was that high?
Well,
I think it felt
so.
to me more like maybe 25%. I really don't know.
wow,
I don't know. It'd be
yeah.
interesting to know. And
Yeah,
thought
we
about
had a
that.
strong community among the women with
Yeah.
the Women's Center, but I don't know. I don't think it was half, no.
Were there women role models on the faculty or staff for you here? Who?
Definitely. Well, Shirley Joan Forsberg, who had several different positions here, but I think that she also was a pastor here to the community in many ways, and, she often would preach and preside at communion, so surely she had that role. But, I also had courses with Letty Russell and with Margaret Farley.
But speaking of her presiding, I think for many of the women, even at that time, it was probably the first time
Right.
that they experienced a woman as the presider at communion. So that was a really important
Yep.
part of her role.
If you were planning for ordination, did your churches at that time ordain women, or was that a question for you?
Yes, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the ordination of women in the Lutheran Church. Or it's coming up now in 2020. So yes, it was a possibility. But in 76, we were still somewhat pioneers, although we knew that we could be ordained. And that was the key thing, yes.
Yeah.
There was a bit of sketchiness about whether it was a good idea to go to a non-Lutheran seminary, but I didn't have a lot of pressure that way. But Susan, you were a different denomination.
Right, I was Moravian, and so I wasn't paying too much attention to the Lutherans. I didn't become Lutheran until after Divinity School, and then was ordained there. But there's so much that I just sort of stumbled into and through. I think back, and there's a lot of steps that now, you would think strategically you do this, and then you take that step and that step. It wasn't like that. It was a lot more, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and then order it later. That's part of it. So.
And we knew, I could just say, we knew we could be ordained, but there's still, at that time was, and is now, considerable sexism in the church. So when I was on my internship, Susan and I did our internships in southwest Minnesota,
rural
and
areas.
I was in Hutchinson, Minnesota, and one of the other interns in my cluster, we were at Bible camp together, and he said, I don't see how you can justify becoming a pastor and taking a job away from a man who needs it to feed his family.
Wow. And I remember very distinctly being on the steps behind the chapel here, talking to another Lutheran male student who said, but Jesus really didn't have any female disciples.
Wow.
And
So ridiculous.
and I said, well, if I know that that's not the way Jesus intended things to be interpreted, and if he did, I don't want any part of the church then. And it was just crystal clear that this was not real.
So share some of those memories of being here, these issues that came up.
Well, one of them we were talking about, so our first year in 1976, Fred Buechner gave the Beecher lectures, and he's wonderful, obviously, with literature and words. But we went to the first Beecher lecture where he was only talking about men in the Bible, and he was pretty sexist in his language and imagery. And then that led to, we had him come to the Women's Center and try to talk to him about, you've got to get this on your radar screen. And it was a shock to him, right?
Oh, I remember it so clearly because he was sitting on, in the Women's Center there were only pillows, big pillows, so there were no chairs, so he had to be sitting on a big pillow, cross-legged there, and he had come, it was like he had woken from a dream, from a long sleep, because it was like everything he heard was so new and different, about sexist language and about stories and about he talked about, Beecher cutting himself when shaving, and then he talked about Pilate.
Yeah.
I talked about Pilate's wife, and it was really like very sexist stuff, and he was really like a deer in headlights. Like he had never heard of such a thing, and people were pretty strong but gentle. People weren't, yelling at him, but I don't have a memory that he changed his lectures because of that conversation.
Yeah, maybe he didn't. But for publication, I think the book is slightly different thanks to us. So
that could be.
But yeah, it was the sadness of looking forward to this really wonderful lecturer who loves to use language and realizing it doesn't include us.
Yeah.
The images and the stories he's telling
Right.
do not include us.
During the time that we were here as well, I was part of a working group to bring together a hymnal for the chapel. And it was, one of the big issues, of course, was how inclusive and what kind of inclusivity was that language going to involve. And it was really an interesting process with Jeffrey Rowthorne and this group that was working together. And I know at one point there was a hymn that just was irredeemable, it seemed like, in terms of the language. And I just said, well, I'm sorry, it's a great hymn, but it just can't go in. And it was kind of a watershed for me to say that. And I don't know, as I step back and think, what am I willing to jettison?
yeah.
in this
Yeah.
long tradition. It's a continuing question, but at that point, in that part of YDS's life and what we were doing, no. Can't go in, sorry.
Wow, I had forgotten
Yeah,
about that,
yeah.
that hymnal, but we came in, I would say, with a pretty strong women's center. So that had happened before I got there, or for any of us got there in '76, and it was in Bacon, and it was lovely. It had a wonderful picture of a woman on the wall with flowing hair, I remember. But I mean, it was a space for women. In fact, we were remembering that there was a woman who, one of the staff had given birth to a little baby boy, and there was at least one woman who participated in the Women's Center who didn't want that little baby boy to be there. So, I mean, there was like
Wow.
there were some really, really,
Yeah.
really intense kind of separatist feminists, but for the most part, I wouldn't say it was that way. But I think by the time Frederick Buechner arrived to give the lectures, we had already had a pretty strong sense of support from other women. We came, there was a huge wine auction that had somehow the women who had been on the staff of the Women's Center had gotten hold of these, like a truckload of wine. I mean, and Bill Meal, I think, was the auctioneer and auctioned off this wine. And it was sort of like, well, the women are really active here and there's a lot of support. So, I mean, I had that feeling.
That's
Yeah.
what was so funny about that was that it was just so odd, They're having a wine auction of not just wine, but wine from upstate New York, or someplace where wine doesn't come from, or and it was just that the women here are really creative. They are really the students, were as important, certainly, as the faculty was, I think, in terms of how it felt to be a woman here.
Well, more so because there were so few women. I mean, just thinking about who were our role models, it really was only the three, right? I mean,
On the faculty.
On the faculty.
Yeah.
So even though men faculty were largely supportive, I think Henry Nouwen was pretty supportive. There just there wasn't the numerical or percentage strength at all. I mean, not just Henry Nouwen, many others, Roland Bateman, lots. But it just was more student focused, and then of course with the help of Joan and Letty and Margaret, and that was all, right?
Well, I think some people would count Deidre McDougall
Yeah,
in there. I
that's
mean,
right,
as a registrar, she didn't teach, but I think she was a presence that
Very much.
really helped people along. But yeah, well, but you should tell your story
Okay,
about
the
that.
story about one of my memories is that the Women's Center, again, the Women's Center and these wonderful, crazy women, sponsored an opportunity for women to get to know their bodies. And so they set out tables in the common room, close the doors, put paper over the windows of the doors and close drapes, I guess. I don't know if there were drapes, but anyway. So it was this protected space. And you could, and a woman, there were tables, and I think if you wanted to do this yourself, you could as well. But there was a woman who was on the table in her gynecological position and a speculum inserted, and we were invited to look at our interior. And the woman. And I remember looking and saying...
With mirrors.
With mirrors. There were mirrors and
So you could really see yourself, yes.
Yeah, so I remember peering there and thinking, I don't really see what I think I'm supposed to see. And she said, well, I've been here a while, and sometimes the cervix just sort of gets tired and flops over. So it's like, but it was just this crazy idea that in the common room, this was happening, and it was...
Incarnational.
Wonderful.
Our
It was
bodies.
very incarnational.
Right, that's
you
right.
are absolutely right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that story. Oh,
I think I missed it. I mean,
You must have been
I
off,
know,
you must have been
remember
off
it now.
campus
I
for
remember it
something.
now.
I don't know.
wow.
You do remember it?
Yes, because
Okay.
we looked at her. I didn't
Yeah.
take my clothes off, right?
No, but I think you could if
yes,
you wanted
could
to.
if you wanted to, and
could
I didn't. But I looked in
I didn't
her,
either.
inside her. Yes,
No.
I do remember that.
Okay. How come you don't remember it really well before?
Well, I guess I was blocking it out. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Is there anything else of that nature
Oh,
you would like to share?
oh man.
No, except that the Women's Center was a very active, vibrant part of campus life, and I think there were some men who found it a little threatening. I mean, I had a friend, someone who is still a friend of mine today, a male person, and he talked about one of the staff people being, pretty strong feminist, and he said, well, I would listen to what she has to say just to be able to look at her. So there we have that was not a real affirming kind of thing, except that she was a, beautiful woman, and
Do you think that some of the male students felt threatened by our feminism back in the 70s?
I think so,
yeah.
sure.
Well, and we were having so much fun too. I think.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hear that from my colleagues now, male colleagues. The kind of wistfulness, like they think that women's theology and feminist and liberation theology really did empower life into all of theology. So I think the idea that women were such a strong community.
Yeah.
But I do have to say, I think the male professor, the classes we had were largely pretty supportive. I had a good experience here. I took a course at the forestry school also. I felt really affirmed at Yale. So it wasn't just the Women's Center, but the fact that for the most part, I mean, there were exceptions. There were males on the faculty who were sexist, but a lot of them were trying.
Yeah, I had a good experience too. I mean, I don't remember in classes being, that there was a lot of sexist stuff going on in the lectures. I mean, that wasn't my experience. But it did make a difference to be able to study with women faculty members. And I think that just even having 3
And
on
for the
faculty.
ministry role models, I mean, still
Yeah.
our preaching professors were all men, like Bill
Right.
Deal and pastoral care. I mean, so to have the model of Joan and Letty, both are ordained, right? Was Letty ordained?
Yeah, she
and,
was.
and that would
Yeah.
celebrate and hear their voices as preachers
Yeah.
and presiders at Eucharist. That
Yeah.
made a huge difference.
Speaking of pastoral care, I do remember, I had forgotten that Lee McGee, and I don't know if you knew her, but Lee McGee was after our years, I think, but she did become a professor of psych and religion, or pastoral counseling, I guess you'd say. But I don't think she may have been a student when we were here, but I think that expanded. I mean, Bonnie Kittle came while we were here in Old Testament,
right.
and surely died way too soon. But
Yeah.
I think for those women faculty, it was really important for them to have each other. I mean, when I would talk to, Letty or Joan, I mean, they really felt a kind of strength because they were not the one person. I mean, that would have, I think, been very hard.
And
For
learning
any of them.
content for me of church history that included women. I forget how that happened, but you had that exhibit on the Shakers, for example, these wonderful women who were in such an important American
Yeah.
utopian movement, but others in history. So I feel like we were already learning sort of her story and the women saints in the Middle Ages. I feel like I learned a lot of content that affirmed
Yes.
that women have always been a
Oh,
part
yeah.
of Christian history. And obviously, whoever talked to you, Susan, was wrong. Mary Magdalene obviously is an apostle to the apostles. So accuracy, I mean, we just had to learn that, and we really did.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
It was. I want to thank you all so much.
Oh, are we done?
Unless you have anything else you want to add.
We could go on forever. We could
We
go
could
on.
go on and on and
Yeah.
on. Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. Well, if there is another minute, we
Okay,
did
roll
talk
a
about.
tape here. Okay.
Well, we talked about an experience in the chapel that some of us at least were in the chapel choir, and we came to that part of the year where in the liturgical year, the assigned day would have been the purification of Mary. And
After childbirth, yeah.
several of us in the choir said, why are we doing this service? I mean, we shouldn't even be honoring this service anymore. So John Bailey, who had been the director, said that if we felt that we couldn't participate in that, we didn't have to, and I think most of us
We walked out.
didn't sing that. But I just remembered now as I'm sitting here that there was a rumor that
yeah.
came from that event that Joan Forsberg had gone to the small chapel, downstairs and
An alternative?
and had burned a hymnal. I mean, it was very. I mean, it was.
That was a rumor.
It was a rumor. I mean, it was not based on anything except that these women had not wanted to participate in this service for the purification of Mary. So there were some.
Yeah,
Pretty-
chapel was a flashpoint, and Susan was on the chapel staff, and
Oh,
lots
that's
of
right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
power dynamics
significant.
as far as what you do in the liturgical year and what counts and
Yeah, what are we going to honor?
Wow.
And a worship experience then, when I did my Lutheran studies at Luther, the coming to that setting with, and I remember singing in the chapel and not being able to even hear my voice because it was so male. And how different that felt from being
Yeah, and
here.
I now teach at a Lutheran seminary where I've been for 25 years, but when I first came onto the faculty there, we had a big battle about the Benedictus in the liturgy, whether you translate as blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, or blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And I was a Greek scholar by then, and it's clear, ho erchomenos, it's the one who comes. And I think some of that courage that I had to fight that battle came from being here, that you just go back to the original language, you look at what it says, and even if it's a reference to Jesus, that's the argument of the males who say, no, it needs to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, because it's Jesus. But the problem is men can hear themselves also in that he.
Right.
So now we capitalize the one, so you can say, okay, it references Jesus, but all people who hear it can hear themselves
Right.
in that blessed is
Yeah.
the one who comes in the name of the Lord.
Yeah. So it was a blessed place, actually.
Yeah, it was
blessed
a blessed
years,
place.
blessed
Right.
years.
And
Yeah.
we've remained friends, the community of alumni, wonderful.
Wonderful.
Right.